You've heard it before, haven't you? That strange whisper in the back of your thoughts. Quiet, persistent, and eerily familiar. It doesn't come from memory or emotion. It speaks from somewhere else entirely. Some call it intuition, others call it imagination, but deep down, you've always known it's neither. It's you. But not the you trapped in this present moment, worn thin by routine, distraction, and the static of daily life. No, this voice is older, wiser, carved from all the choices you haven't made yet, from the person you haven't yet become. It is your future self, calling back through the veil, not as a fantasy, but as a frequency. Most people dismiss that voice. They confuse it with wishful thinking or anxiety. They say, that's not real, because reality has been defined for them by what can be touched and measured. But there's a part of you that still remembers a different kind of knowing, one that doesn't require proof. The kind that arrives in dreams, in symbols, in the sudden clarity that floods your body when you're on the brink of something big. It's not logic, it's recognition. Your future self doesn't talk in sentences, it moves through sensation. And if you've been ignoring it, it's not because you can't hear, it's because the world taught you not to listen. From the moment you were born, you were trained to silence that connection. The system is designed to keep you focused on the past and paralyzed in the present, never aware that time is not a line, but a loop. In ancient temples, mystics knew this. They understood that the self is not bound by chronology. Time bends for those who know how to meet it. They practiced listening, not to others, but to themselves across timelines. They entered trance states, mirrored their breath with the stars, spoke in tones that resonated across lifetimes. They didn't predict the future, they remembered it. You see, the future doesn't just unfold randomly. It emerges from intention, from frequency, from the seeds you plant in your now. And the self you become, 10 years from now, 100 years from now, already exists in that field of probability, like a ripple waiting to reach you. That version of you has answers, not because it is perfect or omniscient, but because it has walked through every fire you're afraid to face. And it's speaking back to you in code, the feeling in your chest when you think about a certain path, the way time slows when you hear a certain name, the image that won't leave your dreams. These aren't coincidences, they are transmissions. So the real question isn't, can I talk to my future self? The question is, am I still enough to hear the reply? Because the answers don't come through force. They arrive in stillness, in surrender, in silence deep enough to drown the noise of who you think you are. And once you truly listen, everything changes. Your future self stops being a fantasy and becomes a guide. Not a voice from somewhere far away, but a current rising from within you, like a memory you haven't lived yet, reminding you that time is not what you've been told, and neither are you. You were taught to think of time like a ruler, linear, cold, predictable, past to present to future. One direction, no exceptions. But that's not how time feels, is it? That's not how it moves in your body. Sometimes the future crashes into you like déjà vu. Sometimes the past loops itself through a smell, a sound, a half-formed thought that shouldn't even be there. You've had moments that felt like echoes, ripples from something ahead pulling you forward, not memories pulling you back. Because time isn't linear. It's a spiral, and your future self lives on a different ring of that spiral, moving beside you, not ahead of you. The spiral explains everything you've felt but couldn't explain. Why you dream of places you've never been. Why you feel drawn to people you just met. Why certain ideas ignite something deep in your chest. These aren't accidents, they're harmonics. Your future self hums on a certain frequency, and when your current self aligns, just enough, you catch it, like a whisper carried by wind. The spiral allows for contact, Not in the way a phone call works, but like the resonance between tuning forks. One vibrates, the other answers. And sometimes the contact is strong enough to crack your illusion of now. That's what people feel in those sudden breakthroughs, in meditation, in altered states, even during crisis. The spiral collapses. You touch something outside of time. But instead of recognizing it, you call it a strange experience, a coincidence, a hallucination. You dismiss it, because nobody ever taught you how to hold it. The spiral demands awareness. You can't walk blindly and expect to reach your future self. You must learn to see with the inner eye, feel with the inner body, move with the inner rhythm. Otherwise, the message is garbled. The signal is there, but you become the static. To navigate the spiral, you must stop chasing time and start entering it. That means unlearning the clock, the calendar, the pressure to arrive. It means learning to feel the cycles within you, the breath, the pulse, the moments of contraction and expansion that have nothing to do with minutes and hours. Your future self lives in that deeper rhythm. It waits in the pause before action, in the breath before speech, in the space between thoughts. That's where the spiral opens, not in motion, but in presence, not in logic, but in vibration. And here's the secret no one tells you. Your future self is already trying to speak. The dreams, the inner nudges, the visions you can't shake, they're not fantasies, they're instructions. Echoes from a version of you who has already become what you're still afraid to step into. That version of you doesn't live far away. It lives beside you on the spiral, waiting for alignment, waiting for you to stop mistaking time for distance, waiting for you to remember that the spiral isn't something you enter later, it's the path you're already on. And every step toward presence is a step closer to remembering what the future you already knows. Your future self does not speak in words the way your conscious mind craves. It doesn't speak in logic or paragraphs. It speaks in frequency, in vibration, in shifts you feel before you understand. This is the first truth you must accept if you are to communicate across the veil of time. The words you've been trained to trust are too slow, too narrow. But frequency is immediate. It bypasses thought. It touches the body, the field, the soul. It hits you like a tone that only you can hear. And when it does, there's no mistaking it. It feels like resonance, like recognition, like you're being answered without a question ever needing to be asked. That is why some moments leave you breathless, why certain ideas light you up from the inside with no explanation, why some paths feel magnetic even when they make no sense on paper. These are transmissions. They're not random, they're feedback. You've felt them again and again, but you've doubted them because they don't fit into the language you were taught to trust. The future does not communicate through logic. It sends signals through sensation, a gut pull, a wave of knowing, a dream that won't fade, a silence that feels like presence. If you're waiting for a voice that sounds like yours, you'll miss it. But if you learn to feel deeply, honestly, you'll begin to receive the signals for what they are. The frequency of your future self is not separate from you. It's embedded in the energy you carry when you are aligned. When you are clear, grounded, and honest, you begin to vibrate closer to the future you that already holds the answers. This is why healing matters, why integration matters. If you are carrying the frequency of fear, shame, or confusion, your signal gets distorted. The message is still there, but it gets scrambled. Your body becomes the antenna. So ask yourself, what are you tuned to? What state are you broadcasting? Because if you want to hear clearly, you must become the channel that can hold the clarity. Every spiritual tradition that lasted understood this. They used sound, breath, movement, and silence not for performance, but for tuning. Chanting was not entertainment, it was attunement. Prayer was not begging, it was frequency alignment. Stillness was not avoidance, it was calibration. These were technologies of connection. and they still work. You don't need a temple. You need intention. You need to shift from noise to signal, from distraction to listening. Your future self is not hiding. It is broadcasting. The question is, can you hear beneath the static? And when you do, when you finally catch the resonance, you'll know. Not because you understand it, but because you feel it in your bones. The message will bypass your doubt and land like a truth you forgot you already knew. That is the language of the future. Not prediction, not explanation, resonance. And once you speak in that tongue, once you match that frequency, communication becomes effortless. You are no longer trying to reach your future self. You are remembering that you are it. You've just been speaking the wrong language. Now you're learning to sing. You think of memory as something that reaches backward. But memory is not limited by the past. The body does not only recall what was, it resonates with what will be. It senses timelines before they unfold. That strange sense in your gut when something is off. That magnetic pull toward a place you've never been. That full body yes you feel when you consider a path that terrifies your mind. These are not fantasies. They are memories of the future. Because the body stores possibility, it is not bound to chronology. It is bound to frequency. And your future self imprints its signature upon you long before you arrive. The mistake is thinking that the mind is the master key. But the mind is limited by programming, by fear, by what it's been taught is possible. The body, on the other hand, bypasses narrative. It remembers through sensation, through alignment, through expansion and contraction. When you feel your chest tighten, when your breath shallows in the face of a decision, that is your body speaking a no. When your spine tingles, when your arms rise in goosebumps, when your belly relaxes into a deep breath, that is your body speaking a yes. Not all emotion is truth, but all sensation is signal. Your future self uses the body as its bridge. This is why trauma clouds the signal. The body that has been overwhelmed, silenced, or shamed will not easily receive transmission. It's not that the message isn't there, it's that the antenna is bent. Healing isn't just about letting go of the past, it's about clearing space for the future. Every time you release an old story from your muscles, every time you forgive what your nervous system never got to process, you are opening a channel. You are making room for what's next. Not because healing is trendy, but because the unhealed body cannot hear the future's call clearly. It mistakes fear for instinct. It shuts the door before the signal can come through. To speak with your future self, you must inhabit your body fully. Not just observe it. Live in it. Move in it with reverence. Stillness is powerful, but so is motion. Dance clears frequency. Breath rewires channels. Cold awakens memory. Heat releases the past. Ritual touch reconnects the severed threads between mind and flesh. Your body is not a burden. It is a temple. It is the ground through which your future anchors itself into now. To ignore the body is to sever the transmission. To revere it is to open the gate. So trust what rises in your flesh before it forms in thought. Pay attention to what contracts and what expands. The body does not lie. It may be wounded. It may carry echoes. But it always points toward integration. Your future self is not trying to convince your mind. It is reaching through time to whisper into your bones. And once you learn to listen, not just with ears, but with skin, with breath, with posture, you will realize you've been receiving messages all along. You just forgot that the body is fluent in the language of what's coming. Now it's time to remember. Each night, when the world quiets and your eyes close, a different current pulls you in. You call it sleep. You call them dreams. But what you enter is not fiction. It is frequency. A dimension where time bends and veils thin. A realm where your past, present, and future selves move without the armor of identity. You think dreams are chaotic, symbolic, surreal, but those are only the masks they wear. In truth, dreams are messages, bridges, meetings scheduled outside the boundaries of logic, and your future self waits there, not as a character, but as a presence, as an atmosphere, as a guide disguised in shifting symbols. You've had dreams that stayed with you for days, for years, images that make no sense but carry a weight you can't ignore, places that feel more like home than anywhere you've lived, conversations that felt like transmissions. These weren't just dreams, they were contact. The language of the future doesn't always arrive in clarity, it arrives in mirrors, and dreams are the most honest of them all. When your conscious mind steps aside, your deeper self begins to speak. Not with words, but with sensation, with architecture, with archetype. The future speaks in dreams because it's one of the few places you still listen without interruption. But most people wake and forget. They brush off the fragments, dismiss them as nonsense. What they fail to see is that dreams are not random. They're rehearsals. Your soul practicing outcomes, your subconscious testing choices, your higher self inserting signals into your story while the ego sleeps. This is why recording your dreams matters. Not because every detail holds truth, but because within the imagery lies a map. Patterns begin to form. Symbols repeat. Emotions intensify around certain ideas. These are not just signs, they are coordinates. And if you learn to track them, they will guide you to the version of yourself you are being shaped into. Some traditions knew this well. They taught dream incubation, falling asleep with a question burning in the mind and trusting the night to answer. They knew how to meet their future selves in the dream world with precision. Not through fantasy, but through discipline. They fasted before sleep, chanted before rest, invoked protection not to ward off nightmares, but to clear the signal. Because dreams are not always kind. They reveal what the conscious mind avoids. They speak in riddles, yes, but also in confrontation. Sometimes your future self doesn't come as a guide, but as a test. Will you listen? Will you act? So tonight, when you drift into that other realm, enter with reverence. Ask the question, invite the contact. Trust what you feel, even if it defies language. And when you wake, don't just move on. Sit with the fragments, decode the atmosphere. Ask not, what does this mean, but what part of me already knows? Because the future is not a place you arrive. It's a presence you meet in dreams. A version of you waiting to remind you that what you call sleep is not escape. It is communion. The portal is open. The only question is, will you walk through it fully awake? You walk through life believing your choices are conscious, your thoughts are deliberate, your beliefs self-authored. But beneath all of that, beneath your words, your habits, your desires, there is a gatekeeper, silent, constant, and ancient. It is your subconscious, and it holds more influence over your reality than anything you've ever admitted. This is not where your secrets hide. It's where your story is written. It's where your future self tries to plant messages only to have them swallowed by old programming. You wonder why you can't hear the answers, why the signs feel distant. But you've forgotten that the future must pass through the gate of your subconscious to reach you. This gatekeeper is not cruel. It's just overwhelmed. It's been conditioned since birth to filter out everything that doesn't match your identity. If you were taught that magic isn't real, it blocks the miraculous. If you were told that dreams don't matter, it erases the symbols. If you grew up believing you weren't worthy of clarity, it drowns the signals in static. The subconscious protects you based on who you used to be, not who you're becoming. And so the voice of your future self becomes muffled, distorted, unrecognizable. Not because it's not speaking, but because the gate is closed. But here's the truth. The subconscious is programmable. It's not a prison, it's a portal. What you feed it, it amplifies. What you repeat, it embeds. Every affirmation, every visualization, every moment of intentional feeling is a seed planted in its soil, not just for manifestation, but for reception. You don't align with the future by hoping. You align by training the gatekeeper to expect it. This is why rituals work, why mantra works, why guided trance, self-hypnosis, dream seeding, all these ancient tools exist not to bypass the mind, but to speak directly to the one who controls the threshold. The subconscious doesn't speak in language, it speaks in repetition. It believes what it sees over and over again. This is why your internal environment matters. If you feed it images of fear, of failure, of chaos, it will close to anything that smells like transformation. But if you give it stillness, symbols, sensory cues of safety and expansion, it softens. It lets the message in. Your future self is not waiting in some distant dimension. It's trying to impress upon your inner world a blueprint of who you could be. But blueprints only matter if the builder listens. So if you truly want to speak to your future self, you must stop trying to shout through the noise of waking life. You must go inward. You must enter the gate. You must change the texture of the stories running beneath your awareness. Because every time you pause and feel deeply into what you desire, not just with thought, but with full presence, you are rewriting the code. You are teaching the gatekeeper that it's safe to let the future in. And once that happens, the conversation flows. The answers become obvious. Not because they're louder, but because you finally opened the door they've been knocking on all along. In a world addicted to noise, silence has become an endangered frequency. But it wasn't always this way. In ancient circles, silence wasn't emptiness. It was access. It was the space where the invisible became audible, where the future could speak without being drowned out by thought. You've been taught to fill every moment, every pause, every breath with something. Music, screens, conversation, scrolling. But your future self doesn't speak through stimulation. It arrives when the channel is clear. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of signal. It is the original interface, the forgotten portal. The noise you drown in daily isn't just external. It's the commentary in your head, the worry, the doubt, the rehearsals of fear disguised as preparation. The mind loops that run in the background, always calculating, always defending. These aren't thoughts, they're interference, and the longer they go unchecked, the more impossible it becomes to hear the subtle frequency of what's coming. Because the future does not shout. It whispers, it nudges. It requires you to stop performing long enough to become receptive, to become a vessel, to become still enough to notice the vibration beneath the vibration. Every wisdom tradition knew this. The mystics, the monks, the visionaries, they all practiced silence, not just as a discipline, but as a doorway. They weren't trying to be good, they were trying to listen. They knew that silence wasn't passive, it was active. It tuned the inner ear, it adjusted the frequency. It stripped away the lies so that only resonance remained. And in that resonance, the future would speak. Through image, through sensation, through sudden, undeniable knowing. You cannot access the future self through volume. You reach it by subtracting everything that is not it. You don't have to escape the world to practice this. You don't need a monastery. You need a moment, a decision, a space between stimuli where you do not react, but receive. Begin with 5 minutes, not to empty the mind, but to let the static settle. Breathe. Close your eyes. Listen, not for sounds, but for signals, the ones that rise from within, the ones that don't use words but feel like memory. Do this daily and the channel clears. The noise softens, and the voice of the future, once distant and distorted, begins to crystallize into form. What comes through in silence isn't always what you expect. Sometimes it's truth, sometimes it's grief, Sometimes it's direction that scares you, but it is always precise, always honest. The future self doesn't traffic in flattery. It reveals what's needed, and only silence has the bandwidth to carry that clarity. You've looked everywhere for answers, books, teachers, signs. But what you're really looking for is space. The kind of space where the next version of you has room to speak. The truth has always been waiting. You were just too loud to hear it. Silence is not absence. It is invitation. And the future responds only when it knows you're listening. You see them everywhere, numbers that repeat, animals that cross your path, phrases that echo in the mouths of strangers. You brush them off as coincidence. But your future self doesn't speak through coincidence. It speaks through pattern, through symbol, through signs left like breadcrumbs across your path, waiting for you to look deeper. You were never meant to understand these signs with your mind. You were meant to feel them with your whole being. Because a symbol is not information, it's activation. It carries a vibration that bypasses intellect and awakens recognition. When something keeps showing up, it's not random. It's a message. And it's not from out there, it's from within. Your future self is not writing you letters. It's shaping your environment. Bending light and shadow to create moments that pierce through your logic. A song at the exact right time. A dream that won't fade. A number that follows you until you finally ask, "What does this mean?" That question is the key. The moment you shift from dismissal to curiosity, the symbol ignites. It opens. It begins to speak. Not in sentences, but in alignment. You begin to feel a pull, a thread, a deeper rhythm guiding your attention. That is not imagination. That is memory surfacing. Memory from the future. Symbols are the future's fingerprints. They show up when you're ready to move, when you're hesitating, when your old identity is too loud and your deeper self needs to remind you. This way. They are often disruptive, uncomfortable. They appear in the middle of your chaos, not your clarity. That's because symbols aren't comfort, they're compass. They are designed to wake you up. And if you ignore them, they get louder. The synchronicity intensifies. The pattern becomes undeniable because your future self doesn't give up on contact. It just waits for you to pay attention. But here's what no one teaches you. Symbols only work if you make space for them to mean something. You have to give them context, reflect, ask, write them down, track the patterns. Over time, they form a language, a private dialect between you and the part of you that already knows. This is why journaling works, why dream recall works, why mapping your synchronicities turns noise into guidance. The moment you begin decoding the symbols, you open the feedback loop. You show your future self that you're listening. And when you listen, more arrives. Your life is not random. Your path is not silent. The symbols are everywhere because the future has been walking beside you all along, leaving traces of its presence like footprints in sand. The question is not whether the signs are real. The question is whether you're ready to see them. Because once you begin to take them seriously, your life transforms from a series of events into a conversation, a back and forth between who you are and who you are becoming. You don't need to chase the future. You need to follow its tracks. The symbols are there. They always were. Now you see them for what they are, the language of remembrance. The person you believe yourself to be, your name, your history, your habits, is not the one who will receive the message from your future self. That identity, while necessary for survival, is also the veil. It filters, limits, and interprets. And more often than not, it distorts. Because your future self is not bound by your biography. It has transcended the masks, the roles, the fears, and it can't fully reach you until you loosen your grip on who you think you are. As long as you cling to identity, you mistake the mirror for the message. You hear the transmission but twist it into something small enough to fit your current self-concept. And in doing so, you dilute it. To speak with the future, you must allow the death of what no longer serves. Not in theory, but in practice. You must release the stories that define you by wounds, by titles, by survival patterns. These aren't truths. They're echoes, scripts written to protect you from pain, but now blocking your expansion. Your future self has no interest in maintaining your persona. It is only interested in your liberation. Which means the messages you receive may ask you to let go of who you think you are, to abandon roles you've spent decades perfecting, to walk away from masks that once gave you safety. It won't be comfortable, but it will be true. This shedding is not a collapse, it's a return. Every layer you release brings you closer to essence, to the version of you that existed before the world told you who to be. That essence is what your future self is built upon. Not your resume, not your reputation, your essence. And that's the frequency you must return to in order to receive. When the mask drops, the channel opens. Not because you've become something new, but because you've become real. Your future self is not a better version of your ego. It's the embodied truth of your soul. You may resist this process. Most do. Shedding identity feels like dying. And in a way it is. It is the death of the lie, the surrender of control. But beyond that, death is clarity, lightness, vision. The communication becomes clearer because you're no longer filtering it through a false self. You are empty enough to be filled, still enough to be moved. This is why ancient initiations required ego death, not to humiliate, but to purify, to make the seeker receptive, to strip away what cannot hear the divine. Your future self is divine, and divinity only speaks where identity steps aside. So the invitation is this: begin loosening your grip on the version of you that plays roles to survive, on the narrative you repeat to feel in control, on the fear that tells you you'll disappear if you stop performing. You won't disappear, you'll finally emerge. And in that emergence, the voice of your future self will flood in like a long-lost memory. Not a stranger, not a fantasy, but the most honest reflection you've ever met. The veil is not outside you. It is you. And the moment you're willing to shed it, the conversation truly begins. You've been told to mistrust your emotions, to keep them in check, to label them as irrational, inconvenient, even dangerous. But that teaching was never for your healing. It was for your containment. Because emotion is power. It is energy in motion, yes, but more than that, it is language. Not of the mind, but of the soul. Your emotions are how your future self pulls you forward. They're how timelines open. They are not random, they're directional. When you feel something deeply and inexplicably, that's not just reaction. It's resonance. Something is calling you. Through the ache, through the longing, through the fire in your chest. That is your signal. The future doesn't guide you with logic. It guides you through feeling, through subtle waves of knowing that rise before thought can form, that swelling in your chest when you contemplate a new path, that sting of truth when you hear a message you weren't ready for, that rush of fear right before you break through an old version of yourself. These are not moods, they are coordinates, and if you follow them, they will lead you exactly where your soul is already trying to go. But you must be willing to feel fully. Not analyze, not suppress, not run, feel. Most people don't know how to feel cleanly. They mistake rumination for emotion. They get stuck in story. But true emotion is pure sensation. It doesn't need explanation. It rises, speaks, and releases if you let it. Your future self uses emotion to push through the static of your present identity. It sends waves into your system, knowing that if it can move your body, it can shift your reality. But when you numb, distract, or fear your feelings, the signal gets lost. the bridge collapses, and you are left wondering why your life feels flat, even when everything looks fine on the surface. This is why emotional honesty is non-negotiable, not just with others but with yourself. If something feels off, honor it. If something stirs your chest into fire or grief or joy, trace it. Sit with it. Let it speak. Because that emotion might not be about now. It might be coming from the timeline you're meant to step into. Your future self isn't speaking from a calendar. It's speaking from alignment. And alignment is always emotional first. If you want to receive clearer guidance, you must become emotionally available to yourself. That is not weakness. That is attunement. So begin there, with the tears that come from nowhere, with the excitement that feels bigger than the moment, with the dread that shows up when you lie to yourself. These are not obstacles. They are messages. And the moment you start feeling instead of fixing, listening instead of labeling, you'll discover something wild. Your emotions are not just reactions to the world. They're transmissions from your future. The bridge is already built. You walk it every time you trust the feeling instead of the fear. Emotion is not the distraction. It is the map. And it's been trying to lead you home all along. You've been taught to believe your thoughts, to take them at face value, to identify with them, defend them, and obey them. But thought is not truth. Thought is frequency. It is the most deceptive and also the most powerful tool you possess. Your future self does not arrive through thought. It arrives through what thought makes space for. And unless you learn to separate the noise from the signal, you will mistake old programming for intuition. You will chase echoes instead of invitations. Because most of what you think isn't new, it's repetition. A loop inherited from fear, culture, and survival. Your job is not to silence thought, it's to tune it. The mind is an instrument. It amplifies whatever channel you're on. When tuned to fear, it becomes obsessive. When tuned to scarcity, it becomes frantic. But when you clear the static, the mind becomes a transmitter. A receiver of insight, vision, and signal from timelines not yet walked. This is what the mystics meant when they spoke of gnosis, not thinking your way to truth, but allowing truth to emerge through a mind that has been stilled, emptied, prepared. The mind cannot lead you to your future self, but it can translate what your deeper self is trying to reveal, if you know how to get it out of the way. This is why stillness practices matter. Meditation is not about stopping thought, it's about returning to the space beneath it, the space where clarity lives, where the voice of the future can echo without distortion. This is why mantra works, why breathwork resets the mental circuit. Because the mind, like a tuning fork, resonates with whatever you give it. Feed it chaos, and it scrambles. Feed it silence, and it sharpens. Thought becomes dangerous when it goes unquestioned, but it becomes divine when it is trained to listen rather than speak. You felt this before. Those rare moments when a thought arrives so pure, so precise, it feels like it came from somewhere else. That flash of clarity that rearranges your entire perspective. That knowing that appears in the middle of stillness. Not forced, not chased. That is not ordinary thought. That is reception. That is what the future feels like when it gets through. And it doesn't happen because you figured it out. It happens because you stopped grasping. You emptied the mental cup long enough for something real to pour in. So let your mind be an ally, not a master. Let it question what it thinks it knows. Let it dissolve when necessary. Train it, cleanse it, sharpen it. But never mistake it for truth. The thoughts that keep you small, safe, or stuck are not yours. They are echoes. The thoughts that liberate, expand, and crack you open, those are messages. Tuning forks from your future self, sent to remind you of who you've always been beneath the noise. You don't need new thoughts, you need new frequencies, and when you tune to those, the future stops being a mystery and starts becoming memory. Desire has been demonized, dressed in shame, mistaken for greed, lust, or distraction. But beneath the conditioning, desire is not indulgence, it's direction. It's the way your soul tugs you toward the timeline you're meant to remember. Not all desire is created equal. There is a desire that comes from the ego, hungry and restless. But there is also a deeper desire, one that arises like a vibration in your bones. It doesn't shout, it hums, it doesn't seduce, it summons. That is the compass of the soul. That is your future self, pulling you forward with a thread made of fire and ache and sacred memory. You've felt it before, that quiet obsession with something you can't explain. A path that calls to you even when it makes no sense. A longing that lives in your chest like a song you haven't heard yet, but already know the words to. That's not fantasy. That's instruction. Your future self communicates through desire because desire bypasses logic. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't negotiate with fear. It simply points. And when you trust it, when you follow the thread, it leads you to the places you were always meant to go, the people you were meant to meet, the versions of yourself you were born to become. But most people ignore this compass. They mistake it for distraction. They numb it with routine. They bury it beneath responsibility. Because following true desire requires risk. It asks you to dismantle the life you've built on shoulds and step into the unknown. It asks you to trust feeling over fact, resonance over reason. And that terrifies the part of you still addicted to control. But the future self does not live inside your comfort zone. It lives just beyond the edge, where desire becomes action, where the pull becomes a path. To awaken this compass, you must begin honoring your longings, not all of them, but the ones that return again and again. The ones that feel alive in your body, even when they terrify your mind. Sit with them. Ask where they lead. Track them not with logic, but with presence. The real desires won't fade under scrutiny. They will grow stronger. And if you follow them, even a little, synchronicity begins to unfold. Doors open, signals multiply, the timeline shifts. Because desire isn't just a feeling, it's a frequency. A signal from your future self reminding you, this is the way. So stop asking if you're allowed to want what you want. Stop measuring desire by what the world says is practical or realistic. Your desires were never meant to be safe. They were meant to wake you up, to remind you of your direction, to crack open the false identity you built to survive and reveal the truth of who you came here to be. The mind will hesitate. The world will warn. But the desire that refuses to die, that's not just you wanting something. That's your future self remembering itself through you. Follow it. That's where the real conversation begins. You were conditioned to chase, to hustle, to earn your worth through exhaustion. The world taught you that if you want a better future, you have to fight for it. Grind, strategize, control every variable. But your future self doesn't respond to force, it responds to alignment. The future you're trying to reach isn't hidden behind effort, it's waiting behind coherence. When your thoughts, emotions, actions, and energy all point in the same direction, the future doesn't need to be forced. It arrives, not through struggle but through resonance, because timelines are not built, they are tuned. This is why some people seem to live in flow, why things unfold for them without effort. It's not luck, it's not privilege, it's coherence. Their inner world is aligned with the timeline they've chosen, and so reality bends around them. They're not pushing, they're listening. They're not controlling, they're calibrating. Alignment means that nothing within you is contradicting the signal. It means your energy speaks the same language as your intention. You can't fake this. The universe doesn't respond to performance. It responds to vibration. And your future self exists at a frequency that cannot be reached by force. Effort has its place, but only when it flows from clarity. When it becomes frantic, disconnected, desperate, it repels. You've felt this. The times you pushed harder and got nowhere. The times you let go, aligned, and watched doors open effortlessly. That's not coincidence. That's mechanics. You don't need to do more. You need to become more precise. Every thought soaked in doubt sends a mixed signal. Every action taken from fear splits your field. Every decision rooted in scarcity fractures your path. Your job is not to do everything. Your job is to become congruent. This is why practices like breathwork, meditation, and embodiment matter. Not because they're trendy, but because they clear the noise. They bring your inner world into harmony. And once that harmony is stable, your outer world responds. Opportunities arrive, people appear. Timing syncs. You think it's magic, but it's alignment. The future you want already exists, but only the version of you that matches its frequency can access it. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. Alignment is not a mindset, it's a state of being, and your future self lives in that state already, waiting for you to match it. So stop trying to build the future with your hands. Start becoming the version of you that aligns with it. This is not about control, it's about coherence. It's not about effort, it's about embodiment. Let go of the need to chase. Sit still, feel into what's misaligned, adjust your signal, tune your being, and watch as the future stops feeling far away and begins to echo through your now. This is how the conversation unfolds, not through shouting into the void, but through becoming the signal that the future cannot help but recognize as itself. You search for the future in tomorrows, in plans, in projections. You try to calculate it, strategize it, visualize it into being. But the future doesn't exist out there. It exists here, in this breath, in this silence, in the sacred, overlooked space of now. The present moment is not just where you live, it's where timelines converge. It's the only point of access, the only true portal. Your future self does not wait ahead. It descends into the now when you become fully present. That is where the conversation happens. Not in your goals, not in your thoughts, but in the still, unguarded now. The mind hates this truth. It wants to run ahead, to prepare, to perform. But the deeper self, the soul, understands. It knows that presence is not a pause in time. It is the collapse of time. It is the moment where linearity dissolves, where memory and possibility blend into awareness. You've felt this before, when everything stopped, when you were so fully immersed in being that the past lost its grip and the future whispered through the air like an invitation. That was not coincidence. That was communion. And every present moment offers it, if you are willing to be here. But presence requires honesty. It asks you to stop escaping into what was or what might be. It asks you to feel what is, fully, to sit with the discomfort, to breathe into the clarity, to let go of needing to become, and simply be. This is where most people turn away. They think being present means being still. But being present means being real. It means facing yourself without armor, feeling without flinching, listening without seeking. In that radical honesty, something opens. A crack in the illusion, a doorway through which your future self can finally step. You cannot hear guidance when your mind is in the past. You cannot receive direction when your body is in defense. The present is not a passive space, it's a magnetic one. It draws timelines to you. It reorganizes reality based on the frequency you hold. Every sacred text, every spiritual teacher, every mystic who touched truth said the same thing in different words. Be here. Now, because now is where eternity hides in plain sight. Your future self is not a fantasy waiting on the horizon. It's a presence waiting in your presence. So if you truly want answers, Return to now. Breathe. Feel your feet. Feel your breath. Feel your body as the axis between what has been and what is becoming. Drop the search. Drop the chase. The future doesn't need you to find it. It needs you to meet it. And the only place that meeting can happen is here, in the unfiltered, unedited now. Because presence is the point where the map folds, where the seeker and the guide become one, and where the voice you've been straining to hear finally speaks with clarity. Because you finally stopped running long enough to listen. You keep asking for guidance, clarity, transformation. You light the candles, say the affirmations, stare into the future with open hands. But here's the truth your ego resists. You cannot receive what you are not yet ready to hold. The future self you seek is not hiding. It's vibrating at a level you must rise to. Not by effort, not by performance, but by becoming the version of you that can hold the signal. Your future self is already speaking. The question is, are you the one who can hear it? Are you the vessel that can receive without distortion, without collapse, without self-sabotage? Receiving is not passive. It is an active transformation, a stripping away of false identities, a clearing of energetic residue, a refinement of your internal landscape. The universe does not withhold. You filter, you block, you reject what you say you want because part of you is still aligned with an old version of yourself. The one who doesn't feel worthy, the one who thrives in chaos, the one who clings to familiar pain. To receive the next transmission, you must become the one who can carry it. This means becoming honest, becoming disciplined, becoming empty in the places that were once clogged with fear. Ask yourself, if the answer came right now, would I trust it? If the opportunity arrived today, would I sabotage it? If the version of me I long to become knocked on the door of my life, would I open or hesitate? Most people live in contradiction, desiring transformation while preserving the exact conditions that prevent it. They ask for new timelines without ending old cycles. They pray for healing, but cling to wounds that make them feel significant. You cannot lie to your future self. It is not moved by words. It is moved by frequency. You have to become the version who can receive, not just the version who can request. Becoming her, becoming him, becoming them. It's not a goal. It's a shedding. You don't build this version from scratch. You uncover it. You remove what is false until only truth remains. That version of you already exists in the field. Your job is to embody them now, not later, not when it's convenient. Now speak how they speak. Move how they move. Make choices they would make, not to perform, but to align. You become the receiver by becoming the resonance. When the signal and the vessel match, reality bends. So stop asking for permission. Stop waiting for confirmation. The future cannot meet the version of you that doubts. It will only recognize you when you stand in your becoming without apology. You must become the one who can receive the frequency of your own evolution. That is the price. That is the path. And when you do, everything you've been asking for stops being distant. It becomes familiar. Because it's no longer something you chase. It's something you are. The receiver was never broken. It was just waiting for you to clear the noise, lift the veil, and finally say, I am ready, because I have become the one who listens. It's easy to believe the connection is broken, that your future self is somewhere far away, sealed off behind time and silence. You imagine reaching outward, upward, waiting for some divine voice to descend. But the contact has already happened. Not once, not in theory, again and again. In dreams you couldn't explain, in decisions that made no sense but changed everything. In moments of stillness when you felt like someone else was present, not beside you but inside you. That wasn't fantasy. That wasn't imagination. That was memory. Because the contact doesn't begin when you believe, it begins when you remember. You've dismissed the signs. You've explained away the whispers. You've called them intuition, luck, gut feeling. But they weren't random. They were moments of overlap, timelines folding inward, self touching self across the veil. Every time you felt that sudden sense of knowing, every time your body moved before your brain caught up, that was contact. The line is open, always has been, but you were taught to ignore it, to favor logic over feeling, to label magic as coincidence. And in doing so, you buried the memory of how to listen. You forgot that the signal is not faint, it's constant. You're just tuned to the wrong frequency. To re-establish contact, you don't need more effort, you need less interference. The signal doesn't come from outside, it rises from within. Your future self doesn't shout over the noise. It waits for you to quiet enough to hear what's already being said. The whisper you get when you wake. The vision that flares during meditation. The sentence that drops into your chest out of nowhere. These are not curiosities. They are transmissions, and the more you honor them, the stronger they become. The line strengthens not through force, but through trust. This is why remembering matters more than believing. Belief still implies separation. It says, maybe, but remembrance bypasses doubt. It roots the connection in your body. It lets you know, with no need for proof, that something beyond your conscious mind is guiding the dance. You've been in contact since before you knew what to call it. You just learned to forget. But even forgetfulness is part of the design, because the act of remembering is what makes the message matter. It isn't about being told, it's about reclaiming what was never truly lost. So the question is not, how do I contact my future self? The question is, what will I do now that I know I already have? The signs are there. The guidance has arrived. You've been nudged, pulled, whispered to, again and again. You just called it something else. Now you see it for what it is. Not imagination, but instruction. Not hope, but memory. The contact is not coming, it's ongoing. And every time you choose to trust what rises from within, you strengthen the bond. You become the frequency. And in doing so, the conversation becomes constant, seamless, sacred. Not between two selves, but one remembering itself through time. It doesn't speak in logic. It doesn't follow sequence. It arrives like lightning, like a pulse under your skin, like a breath you didn't realize you were holding. You call it intuition, but that word has grown too soft, too misunderstood. What you're really sensing is the voice of your timeless self. The self that is not bound by chronology, not fixed to identity, not confined to this moment's rules. Your intuition is not a feeling. It is a form of knowing that bypasses the mind entirely. It is how your future self speaks when your present self is quiet enough to listen. You've already experienced it. The instant yes that doesn't wait for facts. The no that tightens your chest before you can explain why. The name that floats into your awareness hours before a call. The knowing that arrives before the evidence. These are not guesses. They're not coincidences. They are echoes from a self that has already walked ahead and is reaching back through the veil. Intuition isn't vague. It's exact. But it doesn't argue with you. If you doubt it, it fades. If you overthink it, it dissolves. It requires presence, not proof. Most people don't trust it because they were never taught how. They learned to silence it early. Be reasonable, they were told. Make sense. But the future doesn't make sense to the logic of the past. So intuition becomes a threat to the structure. That's why it was pushed down, mocked, ignored. And yet it persists, because your future self doesn't give up. It keeps sending signals, waiting for you to trust your own inner compass more than the maps handed to you. Intuition is not there to entertain you, it's there to reroute you, to break the loop, to shift the pattern before your mind even knows what the pattern is. To strengthen it, you must stop second-guessing. The moment you feel the pull, follow it. The moment you feel the contraction, pause. Your body knows. Your field knows. Your mind will catch up later. Build the relationship like you would with a friend, by listening, by honoring, by acting. Every time you choose intuition over conditioning, you make the voice louder. You teach your system that it is safe to trust the unseen. And when that trust stabilizes, the communication becomes seamless. You no longer wait for signs, they flood in. Your intuition is not something you have, it's something you are. It's not a tool, it's a frequency. And that frequency is the language your future self speaks fluently. When you finally begin to trust that inner voice, the distinction between past, present, and future starts to blur. Because you're no longer navigating from memory, you're moving from direct communion. Intuition is the key. Not to predict what will happen, but to align with what already is. Not to guess the path, but to remember the way. Listen, that voice isn't new. It's ancient. And it's always, always been yours. Every time you approach a breakthrough, a part of you pulls back. You feel it as doubt, fatigue, distraction, fear. It doesn't always scream. It whispers, it delays, it rationalizes. This isn't failure. This isn't weakness. This is resistance. And resistance always shows up at the doorway of transformation. It is the guardian of the threshold, not to punish you, but to test your readiness. Because the future self you long to contact carries weight, power, responsibility. It's not handed to you lightly. You must prove, not to the universe, but to yourself, that you can hold what you're asking to receive. Resistance isn't the enemy. It's a mirror. It shows you where you're still attached to the old self, where your body remembers a time when change meant danger, where your nervous system still interprets growth as threat. It's not here to stop you, it's here to ask a question. Are you truly ready to become the version of yourself you keep calling in? If not, resistance will give you the gift of delay, because moving forward before you're ready is more damaging than standing still. The future self won't disappear, but it will wait, not out of punishment, but out of precision. When resistance arises, most people retreat. They interpret it as a sign to stop. But resistance is not a sign to turn around. It's a signal to move with awareness, to slow down, breathe deeper, look closer. The moment you stop running from it and begin to meet it, you discover its true purpose. It's not just guarding the threshold, it is the threshold. To pass through, you must meet yourself at the edge of your pattern. The story you've always told, the habit you've always defaulted to, the identity you've always protected. You must look that part of you in the eyes and say, I choose to continue anyway. This is the hidden wisdom of ancient rites of passage. The initiate was always tested, not to break them, but to reveal them, to show them the places within still tethered to fear, control, and doubt. Resistance creates friction so the false can burn away. It is the fire that prepares you to hold the weight of your own expansion. The greater the message you are meant to receive, the greater the resistance that rises to meet it. Not to block you, to shape you, to carve out the space required for something higher to enter. So when resistance comes, don't collapse, don't distract, don't numb, bow, thank it, study it, and walk through it. Not with force, but with clarity, with steadiness, with devotion to who you are becoming. Your future self is on the other side of the veil, but the veil is made of everything you still believe you are not. Resistance will bring it all to the surface, and if you're brave enough to face it, you'll find the gate opens not with a key, but with the courage to keep walking when everything in you wants to turn back. That's when the transmission comes. That's when the real you begins to emerge. In a world addicted to randomness, ritual has become forgotten, dismissed as superstition or unnecessary formality. But your future self doesn't thrive in chaos. It anchors through rhythm. And ritual is rhythm made sacred. It is the structure that tells your system, I am ready. I am listening. I am aligning. Without ritual, signal is unstable. The messages arrive but scatter. The contact is brief but ungrounded. You might feel the transmission for a moment, but without a container, it dissolves before it transforms. Ritual is not about control, it's about coherence. It's the architecture through which the sacred can stay. Your future self doesn't need you to perform, but it needs you to prepare. The same way your body needs a posture to meditate, your field needs a pattern to receive. Ritual creates that pattern. It clears space. It aligns intention. It signals to the subconscious that this is not just another moment. This is contact. Whether it's lighting a candle, breathing in stillness, speaking a question aloud, or placing your hand on your chest, it's not the action itself that matters, but the presence you bring to it. Repetition is not boredom. It is tuning. It is how you build a frequency that the future can recognize. Every lineage that honored transformation understood this. The initiates didn't rush in unprepared. They fasted. They purified. They marked the moment with silence, with music, with symbols, with movement. Not to impress the divine, but to become divine. Ritual turns the ordinary into a portal. It teaches your system that something beyond the linear is now welcome. When done with presence, even the smallest act becomes an invitation. A cup of water, a circle of breath, a whisper at sunrise. These are not empty gestures. They are anchors. They tell the timeline, I am here, I am awake, I am ready to receive. And here's the paradox. Ritual is both ancient and personal. You don't need someone else's steps. You don't need robes or incense or temples. You need sincerity. You need rhythm. You need to choose a pattern that brings you back to yourself. Something you return to again and again, not out of habit but out of reverence. When you do, you'll notice something strange. The messages get stronger. The answers come faster. The future feels nearer, not because it has changed, but because you have. The ritual hasn't summoned the divine. It has sharpened your capacity to perceive it. So choose your rhythm. Make it yours. Let it be simple, sacred, repeatable. Let it live in your body, not just your mind. Because ritual is not a performance. It's a posture, a stance of openness, a pattern that says, this is where I meet myself beyond time. And in that space, the future doesn't have to shout to be heard. It slips in gently, clearly, as if it had been waiting all along for the moment you chose to become still enough, present enough, devoted enough to hold the signal without it breaking. Ritual is the holding, and through that holding, the conversation finally deepens. You are taught that memory lives only in the past, that it belongs to what has happened, what has been, what's already written. But memory is not a storage unit. It is a frequency. And frequency is not bound by time. The deeper part of you remembers not only where you've been, but where you are going. The sensation you call déjà vu is not a glitch. It's recognition. It's a fragment of a memory that hasn't fully unfolded yet. It's your future self stirring in the body, reminding you, you've been here before, just not in this version of you. This is not imagination. This is how timelines work. The future sends echoes backward, not in words, but in pattern, emotion, atmosphere. You touch something, a face, a choice, a sentence, and something inside flinches or opens with no logic attached. That is future memory. It's not about predicting events. It's about feeling the resonance before the moment fully arrives. And when you're attuned to that memory, you begin to navigate not by logic, but by familiarity. You recognize alignment because your soul already walked that path outside of time. The ancients knew this. They spoke of soul memory, remembrance that transcends birth and death, that whispers through symbols, dreams, and triggers. They didn't think of the future as something unknown. They saw it as a destination already embedded within the soul's blueprint. The only question was whether you would listen to the memories you hadn't yet lived. In ritual, they called these forward echoes, the way your body knows before your mind catches up, the way the dream shows the shape of something long before life unfolds it. You've experienced this. You've made choices that made no sense until they changed everything. You followed hunches that felt ridiculous until they led you to exactly what you didn't know you needed. You weren't guessing. You were remembering. You weren't creating the future. You were aligning with a version of you that had already lived it, somewhere in the quantum field. This is not magic. It's mechanics. When you enter stillness, when you drop the noise, those future memories rise like bubbles through water. And when you honor them, they grow stronger, faster, clearer. So ask yourself not just, what do I remember? But what do I keep almost remembering? What truth keeps circling the edge of your awareness, just out of reach? What image, idea, or feeling keeps returning without a clear source? That is not random. That is the shape of who you're becoming. The memories of your future self are not waiting to be invented. They are waiting to be reclaimed, not with effort, but with presence. The future is not an empty page, it's a buried text. And every time you trust the ache of recognition, you turn another page. You remember what was always written. You remember yourself. Look around you. The space you occupy, the objects you keep, the noise you tolerate. They're not just surroundings, they're signal. Your environment is not passive, it is alive with resonance. It reflects your internal world back to you in constant, subtle ways. And if you want to speak with your future self, if you truly want to align with a new timeline, you must treat your environment as sacred architecture. Because your future self cannot land in cluttered fields. The signal cannot stabilize in chaos. The room must match the frequency of the arrival. Otherwise, the message dissipates before it can root. This is not about minimalism, it's about coherence. What do you allow into your home, your phone, your mind? What words do you place on your walls? What music do you play when no one is listening? What tabs are open for hours on your screen? These are not aesthetic choices. These are invitations. Your environment responds to your unconscious alignment. If it's filled with distractions, noise, or past versions of yourself, it will continue to broadcast those timelines. But when your environment becomes intentional, when it begins to echo who you are becoming, it opens like a vessel, and the future begins to echo back. Ancient mystics knew this. Temples weren't built for beauty. They were built for frequency. Every stone placed with care, every sound designed to harmonize, every symbol chosen to remind the seeker of who they are becoming. The ritual didn't begin with the chant, it began with the space. Because when the space shifts, the body follows. When the body aligns, the channel clears. And when the channel is open, the conversation with the future self becomes clear, continuous, and transformative. You don't need sacred architecture to begin. You only need attention. Clear a drawer, light a candle, place a symbol on your altar, your desk, your mirror, somewhere your eyes can rest and remember. Burn away what no longer carries your frequency. Close the tabs that leak your energy. Let the space around you breathe with who you are becoming. This is not superstition. This is signal work. This is frequency design. And when your environment stops echoing your past, it begins to receive the future. Your future self is already circling, waiting for the ground to stabilize, waiting for the room to become still enough to hold the weight of the message. When your space becomes intentional, your path accelerates. Because now your entire reality is saying the same thing. I am ready. Not just in thought, but in structure. Not just in desire, but in design. You don't summon the future by wanting it. You make it welcome by preparing the temple. And that temple is not somewhere far away. It's right here, in the space you touch every day. Make it sacred. Make it yours. Let it speak back the version of you that's been waiting to come home. The future does not answer every question. It is not an oracle vending machine. It responds only to resonance. It listens for precision, for sincerity, for the questions that carry the weight of readiness. You've been asking, but have you been asking the right way? Not every question is a key. Some are locks. Some keep the loop alive. What should I do? Keeps you stuck in dependency. What if I fail? Keeps you aligned with fear. But there are other questions, deeper, sharper, cleaner, that open the veil. That signal your future self. I am not just curious. I am prepared. It begins with intention, not desperation. The future doesn't respond to panic, it responds to alignment. When you ask from a grounded, still place, the field changes. The message doesn't come louder, you become quieter. And in that stillness, the answer can land. But not all answers are words. Sometimes they arrive as images, as shifts in energy, as dreams, as patterns repeating with impossible precision. You must learn to hear the answer in the form it chooses, not the form you demand. That is humility. That is attunement. That is how conversation with the future actually works. Ask questions that move energy. What am I pretending not to know? What must I let die to become who I truly am? What timeline am I feeding with my attention? These are not comfortable questions. They're disruptive. But disruption is the threshold. The future self does not coddle. It clarifies. It cuts through illusion with precision. And your questions must match that precision. Vague questions get vague answers. Shallow inquiries return static. But ask the question that only the next version of you would dare to ask, and the future floods in like light-breaking glass. This is what ancient initiates were trained to do. Not just receive, but inquire. Not just listen, but sharpen the question until it became a blade. In mystery schools, the question itself was a form of initiation. It determined the level of guidance you were capable of holding, because when you ask the right question, the answer changes you. It rewrites you. It demands a new pattern, a new frequency, a new identity. That's why most people never hear it. They're asking to be comforted, not transformed. So if you truly want to hear your future self, ask better. Ask bolder. Ask from your bones. Let the question be a mirror that reveals what you are now willing to see. And then listen, not with your ears, but with your life. The response may not come in the form you expect, but it will come, because the right question is not a request. It is a ritual, a signal to the sacred timeline that you are ready to receive the weight of your own becoming. Ask well, and the future will answer. Always. You've been told time is rigid, that it ticks forward with mechanical indifference, that you are subject to its laws, its limitations, its decay. But time is not what you think it is. Time bends, time folds, time waits for those who know how to move with precision. Your future self isn't sitting far ahead on some distant path, it is circling you now, waiting for the moment when your vibration matches the curve of the timeline it inhabits. When that alignment happens, time collapses. The future rushes in. What should have taken years can take days. What once felt impossible becomes inevitable. Not because time changed, but because you did. Alignment changes velocity. It shifts your relationship to reality. When you are fragmented, doubting, scattered, time stretches. The future stays elusive. Everything feels slow, delayed, far away. But when your inner world comes into coherence, when your thoughts, emotions, and actions point in the same direction, time responds. It bends toward you. It delivers. That's why people in deep flow describe time as strange, elastic, magical. It's not magic. It's mechanics. You're not at the mercy of time. You are in partnership with it. And when you move in rhythm with your deeper self, time stops resisting. It joins you. This is what mystics, prophets, and visionaries have always hinted at. That time is a veil, not a wall. That prophecy isn't prediction, it's resonance. They weren't guessing the future, they were inhabiting it, living at the edge of now where the membrane between timelines thins, where the echo of what's coming is louder than the noise of what is. You felt it too, a moment when everything aligned so perfectly it scared you, a feeling that you'd been there before, a decision that rewrote months of struggle in a single instant. That was time bending, not around your mind, but around your alignment. To access this, you must release your addiction to control. Stop trying to plan every step. Start listening for the pull. Your future self is not measured in minutes. It's measured in momentum. And momentum comes when you move in integrity with your becoming. You don't have to push the river. You have to remove the stones, the fears, the attachments, the beliefs that fracture your field. Because the river of your future is already flowing, you don't create it, you meet it. And when you do, everything accelerates. So stop saying, someday. Stop treating your future as a destination forever out of reach. You are not separate from it. You are circling it now, waiting for the click, the frequency match, the moment when your now opens just enough to let the beyond enter. When you align, time obeys. It bends not to your will, but to your essence. That is not fantasy. That is the hidden law beneath the illusion. And when you live by that law, the impossible stops being a matter of time. It becomes a matter of alignment. Every person you encounter, every trigger you feel, every moment that repeats itself, these are not accidents. They are mirrors. The outer world is a projection field, and your future self uses it to speak when your inner ear is still learning how to hear. This is the mirror principle. You meet only reflections, not of your surface self, but of the frequencies you carry, the lessons you need, the timeline you're aligned with. The more unconscious you are, the more the mirror shows you your shadows. The more aware you become, the more it shows you your truth. You say you want to meet your future self, but are you paying attention to what the world is reflecting back right now? The people who ignite something in you, admiration, envy, anger. What part of you do they represent? Are they reminders of who you're afraid to become, or fragments of who you're meant to be? The events that recur, the cycles you swear you've outgrown, are they punishment or repetition meant to wake you up? Your future self will often hide in the least expected reflections, not to trick you, but to teach you how to see with spiritual eyes, not just physical ones. This is why relationships are sacred technologies, why conflict is code, why synchronicities increase when you're close to alignment. The outer world bends to your internal state, not as reward or punishment, but as feedback. If your timeline feels stagnant, your mirror is cloudy. If your path feels alive, your mirror is clean. The world is not happening to you. It is happening through you. And the reflections you attract are not mistakes. They are messages holding up the precise tone of your now, so you can choose whether to continue or recalibrate. Your future self uses mirrors to test your readiness. It sends people who speak truths you're not ready to hear. It sends circumstances that force you to choose differently, act boldly, walk away from old patterns. If you miss the message, the mirror repeats. Not to punish, but to give you another chance to see clearly. When you recognize this, every moment becomes an opportunity to refine your frequency. You stop blaming. You start integrating. You stop wishing things were different and start asking, what is this showing me about my alignment? So stop looking for the future only in visions or voices. Look into the faces of those around you. Listen to the words that sting. Watch the patterns that return. The mirror never lies. It only reflects. Your work is not to control the reflection, but to shift the self that stands before it. When you rise in frequency, the mirror changes. New people appear. New doors open. the future begins to shimmer through the present, not as prophecy, but as precision. You don't meet your future self in some mystical void. You meet them every day in the mirrors you've been trained to ignore. Start looking again. This time, see, every timeline you could live already exists. Some are filled with clarity and resonance, others echo your past in loops. The difference between them isn't luck, fate, or divine favor. It's choice. Simple, powerful, underestimated choice. The moment you decide, not wish, not hope, not try, but decide, you shift timelines. Reality rearranges around the commitment, not because you forced it, but because you signaled coherence. The future responds instantly to alignment, and alignment begins the moment you stop hesitating. But most people never choose. They delay, they defer, they intellectualize the decision until the window closes. Why? Because choice is terrifying. True choice means death, not of the body, but of the version of you who existed before the decision. The self who settled, who played small, who stayed safe. Choosing a new timeline means leaving that self behind. And even when it's painful, the familiar self clings. That's why you say, "I don't know," when you actually do. That's why you ask for signs after the answer has already landed. Not because you're confused, because you're standing at the gate, and part of you is afraid to walk through. But here's what your future self needs you to understand. Until you choose, nothing moves. The guidance can't land, the signal can't stabilize, the path can't unfold. The universe doesn't respond to maybes, it responds to movement, it matches clarity, it accelerates certainty. You don't need to know every step, you only need to choose the direction. Once you do, synchronicities appear, resources align, the timeline assembles itself, not because it was created on the spot, but because it's been waiting for you to pick it all along. This is the hidden alchemy of transformation. Every pivot begins with a decision that feels too small to matter, but it changes everything. A phone call you make, a conversation you end, a room you walk into without knowing why. The moment you choose from soul instead of fear, the veil lifts. That's when the timeline shifts, and often you don't feel the effects immediately. You'll be tested. The old version will beg you to come back. But if you hold your choice, not perfectly but faithfully, the new path locks in. And you begin to see the version of you that has always existed on the other side. So choose, not from logic but from resonance, not for comfort but for alignment. Let the decision become the doorway. Let it be the spell, the ritual, the message to your future self that says, "I'm no longer negotiating with who I've been. I'm ready to become who I already am." And when you do, the shift will come. Not with thunder, but with precision. Quiet at first, then undeniable, because the future cannot meet you until you choose the timeline where you already belong. And that timeline starts the moment you stop standing still. It's not enough to understand. It's not enough to feel. It's not even enough to see the vision clearly. The future self does not respond to thought. It responds to embodiment. Until the wisdom you receive becomes something you live, the transmission remains incomplete. You've been touched by truth. You've glimpsed what's possible, but unless you walk it into your breath, your posture, your choices, it remains theoretical. A dream, not a timeline. A spark, not a fire. The universe doesn't ask if you agree with the message. It asks if you're becoming the one who can carry it. You think you're waiting for confirmation. But the confirmation comes when you act. When you speak from the version of you who's already arrived. When you move as if the future is no longer distant, but present. Every step you take in alignment becomes proof, not to others, but to the field, to the deeper layers of you still unsure. Embodiment creates coherence. It tells your body, your subconscious, your energetic system. This is not a wish, it's real. And when your whole being agrees, the shift locks in. You stop floating between timelines, you land. This is why integration is sacred. You cannot channel light and stay unchanged. You cannot glimpse the vision and return to the same patterns without consequence. The future self is not an aesthetic. It's a recalibration. It will change how you speak, how you breathe, how you hold silence. It will strip away what no longer fits, not to punish you, but to make room for the frequency you've chosen. Every insight becomes an instruction. Every download becomes a demand. Prove it with your life. Embodiment is not performance. It is presence. It is fidelity to what you've seen, even when the world hasn't caught up yet. You don't need to become perfect. You need to become consistent. Every time you align your actions with the frequency of your becoming, you strengthen the bridge. You walk as the future self. Not someday, but now. It shows up in the mundane. The food you eat, the words you use, the boundaries you hold, the people you allow access, the way you sit with silence instead of seeking distraction. Every gesture becomes a spell, a signal, a stamp that says, I am no longer pretending. I remember who I am. So ask yourself, what does your future self do differently? And then do it, not when it's convenient, but when it matters. In the tension, in the resistance, in the in-between. This is how the transmission becomes transformation, not by knowing more, not by feeling more, but by becoming more. The message was never just meant to be heard, it was meant to be lived. And embodiment is the moment when the echo of the future stops circling and finally speaks through you. You think you're falling apart, that you've lost direction, lost clarity, lost the signal you were beginning to hear. The visions are foggy, the energy is scattered. Everything that once felt aligned now feels like ash in your hands. But what you're experiencing is not failure, it's preparation. Collapse is not the end, it is the clearing, the breaking apart of who you were so that who you are becoming can enter without distortion. The future self doesn't arrive into stability, it arrives through the ruins. Because only in collapse do your defenses crack wide enough to let something real through. You've been taught to fear breakdown, to label it as regression, to fix it, hide it, medicate it. But in the mystical current, collapse is sacred. It is the ego losing grip. It is the architecture of the old identity, burning to make room for the transmission of the next timeline. What feels like chaos is actually coherence being rearranged. The life that no longer fits begins to fall away. Jobs, relationships, beliefs, habits. Not because you're cursed, because you're clearing space. The future self cannot inhabit a vessel that clings to everything it was never meant to carry. In the void that follows collapse, silence deepens. And it is in that silence that the first true whispers of contact often begin. When the distraction is gone, when the performance ends, when the version of you that could hold the past no longer exists, that's when the frequency shifts. That's when your future self can speak, not through metaphor, but through memory, not through glimpses, but through guidance. But it requires that you stay, that you breathe through the unraveling, that you don't try to rebuild too quickly just to feel safe again. Collapse is the invitation. Stillness is the reply. You are not broken. You are between versions, between timelines, between masks, and the ache you feel is not failure. It's transformation moving through you like fire through a forest. The old is dying with dignity. Let it. Do not rush the rebirth. Do not try to be strong in ways that no longer serve you. Let yourself fall, cry, feel lost. This is not regression. This is realignment. The pieces that remain after the collapse are the parts that belong to the next chapter. Everything else was scaffolding. Necessary once. Now, obsolete. So when you find yourself in that dark silence, when everything you thought you were begins to dissolve, remember this. You are not collapsing. You are contacting. The signal is sharpening. The frequency is rising, and soon the voice you've been aching to hear will speak with clarity, because you've finally made space. Because the future doesn't come to the version of you who has it all together. It comes to the one brave enough to fall apart with intention, to die into the becoming, and rise not as someone new, but as someone remembered. You walk through life believing you are one self, one voice, one consciousness neatly wrapped in a name and a story. But that's the illusion. The truth is deeper, stranger, more expansive. You are not a single identity. You are a chorus, a convergence of timelines, lifetimes, patterns, dreams, wounds, wisdoms. Inside you live many voices. The child you were, the ancestor you echo, the shadow you avoid, the guide you become. Your future self is not separate from these. It is another voice in the choir, waiting for you to turn down the volume of fear long enough to hear the melody. This is why your inner world feels conflicted, why part of you wants change and another part resists, why you can feel clarity one day and chaos the next. It's not that you're broken, it's that the choir is out of harmony, and the future self only speaks clearly when the internal discord softens, not through control, but through integration. You don't silence the other voices, you gather them, you sit them down, you listen. Because every version of you, every age, every identity, every mask holds a piece of the frequency you're trying to become. Integration doesn't mean agreement, it means alignment. The part of you that doubts needs reassurance, the part that sabotages needs compassion, the part that dreams needs protection. Your future self doesn't override these voices, it includes them, leads them, becomes the conductor. But it can't lead until you acknowledge the parts you've disowned, the ones you reject in shame or suppress in judgment. These unintegrated voices are the static in the channel. They distort the transmission. They echo old timelines, not because they're malicious, but because they're unheard. This is why healing matters, not to fix you, but to tune you. The chorus must resonate. The dissonance must be felt, honored, transformed. Your job is not to force yourself into stillness, but to understand the inner orchestra well enough to restore balance. And when you do, when your system begins to sing in unison, the future self doesn't have to shout. It hums through you. It becomes the melody that guides your every step. Not because you're guessing anymore, but because you've become the instrument that remembers how to play the song. So stop trying to be one thing, one voice, one perfect self. You are a multitude, and your power lies in your ability to integrate, not to fragment. When the self becomes whole, the veil becomes thin. The future self is not a stranger waiting down the line. It is a harmony waiting for the space to rise. And when you quiet the internal war, not by suppression, but by listening, you become the echo of the very frequency you've been trying to find. Not a student of the future, but its living sound. You've looked outward for answers, for signs, for teachers, for systems, for salvation. You've chased mentors, methods, maps, hoping they would reveal what you already sense inside, that something more is trying to reach you. But here is the truth, your future self won't stop whispering. You are the oracle, not someday. Now, the guidance you seek is not out there. It's encrypted in your own being. Your bones hold codes. Your breath carries memory. Your heart pulses with timelines. You were never meant to be a passive receiver of prophecy. You were meant to embody it. The ancient mystics knew this. They didn't worship oracles because of divine favor. They revered them because oracles listened. Deeply, unflinchingly. They cultivated presence so piercing, silence so complete, that truth had no choice but to enter. You have that same capacity. The veil between you and your future self is not time, it's doubt, it's noise, it's the belief that only others are qualified to know. But your knowing has never left you. It's just been buried beneath conditioning, fear, and the addiction to seeking outside what was always encoded within. The most sacred transmissions come not when you ask the world, but when you ask yourself, when you stop deflecting and finally sit in the fire of your own frequency, when you stop demanding proof and start trusting the resonance in your chest. When you ask a question in silence and let the body answer, not in words but in shifts, in sensation, in symbols. This is not fantasy. This is ancient technology, and it is awakening again in you, not to make you feel special, but to remind you that you were never powerless. You were just unpracticed in your own listening. You don't need to wait for the world to confirm what you already feel. You don't need another sign if you've already received the same message 5 times. You don't need permission to act when every cell in your body is vibrating. Yes. The oracle isn't outside. It's your mirror, your presence, your ability to drop beneath identity and into essence. When you honor that, your decisions carry clarity. Your words carry weight. Your path bends around your alignment. Because you are no longer moving through life as a seeker, you are walking as the signal itself. So close your eyes, breathe deeper, sit in the sacred stillness of your own knowing. Ask not, will I receive guidance? Ask, am I willing to trust that I already have? The oracle you've been waiting for is not another voice. It is the moment you realize your voice was it all along. When you understand this, the transmission is no longer distant. It becomes the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you decide without delay. Because oracles don't guess, they remember. And you are one memory away from becoming the guide you've been searching for all your life. You've come full circle, not to an ending, but to a beginning that was always waiting beneath the noise. You've reached into dreams, listened in stillness, followed signs, faced resistance, and now you stand in the center of the labyrinth with one truth echoing louder than all the others. The answer has always been you, not the surface self, not the performer, not the fractured fragments built to survive, but the deep, ancient, sovereign core of you, the one who remembers, the one who chose this incarnation, the one who has always been in dialogue with the divine. Your future self was never a distant version to be chased. It was the part of you that never forgot. It spoke in nudges. It whispered through symbols. It shaped the mirrors around you until you could finally look, not outward, but inward. Every message you sought was encoded in your own body. Every direction you begged the universe to give was already vibrating in your nervous system. The silence wasn't absence, it was invitation. The pause was not punishment, it was preparation. You weren't blocked, you were being initiated. Now you see. There is no veil except the one you're willing to drop. No voice more accurate than the one that rises when you are still. No guide more precise than the version of you who has already walked through fire and come back with clean hands. You've been receiving answers all along, but you didn't recognize them because you were waiting for something louder, something external, something stamped with divine authority. But the most sacred authority is embodiment, and you have become the signal that you once tried to summon. This is not the climax. It is the remembering. The shift from seeking to embodying, from asking to becoming, from hoping to transmitting. Your future self does not need to send messages anymore, because you are now the message. You carry the frequency. You are the oracle, the mirror, the transmission. And every step you take from this place is not a guess. It is a declaration, a lived answer, a timeline solidified not by prediction, but by presence. So walk, not towards the future, but as it. Speak not from who you were, but from who you have become. Let every moment be a listening. Let every choice be a remembrance. Let every breath be a ritual. The journey was never about arriving somewhere else. It was about realizing You are the destination. You are the voice. You are the answer. And now there is no more separation. There is only the self, expanded across time, echoing back the most ancient truth of all. You already know. You always did. Now live like it.